to
Welcome into Leather Brains, your host here, Slapdog, and it is the post-NFL draft, and boy, do we have a lot to talk about. Can't do it alone, never do it alone. I always have a great crew around me, and today I have Alan Casanova Castro and my boy, the Yeti, here. Gentlemen, it's great to have you here. Great to discuss all of the things NFL draft. But before we do that, I want to talk about something that's not so fun. I want to get this out of the way. I want to start by talking about the tragedy that has happened in Omaha, Nebraska. We are all from Omaha, Nebraska. We don't really talk about where we're from or anything like that too often, but I just want to highlight this because if anybody is not aware, there were some pretty devastating storms that blew through, tornadoes in the Omaha metro area this last week, and still are currently sounds like there's sirens going off today for you gentlemen, and there are storms still pending. So our thoughts and prayers go out to everybody that has suffered the tragedy there. And if you would like to donate, please go to the Red Cross website, throw a couple bucks to them. Shameless plug. We're so thankful to have this platform where we can do and say things like this, but it really does truly mean the world. I think we all probably know people firsthand that have lost their homes, and it really is such a sad and terrible thing. So dollar goes a long way. Really appreciate any donations that anybody would like to contribute. Once again, redcross.com. We'll put it over on Twitter later as well. Additionally, if Alan and Yeti drop off on the call today or on the show today, it is because they lost internet because there's a pending tornado. So I just wanted to let everybody know it's not because they hate you or me. Maybe they hate me, but most likely the situation is that they have lost internet because of the storms. So
Alan, we should just drop off and let Slaps talk for 40 minutes.
No, we should just go.
That would be very sad.
I gotta go.
That would be sad. I'm wearing my Cardinals flag. I got the Leather Brains flag behind me, and I'm just going to sit here and monologue for 40 minutes. Would be very difficult. So let's turn over the leaf here to a little bit brighter of a subject. Let's talk about Travis Kelce. Let's start here. We'll talk about a 2-year deal. Travis Kelce signed. It was announced yesterday. He is now the highest paid tight end in the NFL. Long overdue. I mean, let's give a clap. Travis Kelce is the best tight end in the NFL by and large. I think we all can agree on that. But I have some thoughts. Alan, Scotty's not here today. He's our other Kansas City Chiefs fan that is on the Leather Brains team. So I have you here though, and I pose this question: is this an unneeded move for the Kansas City Chiefs? And the reason I ask that is because obviously he was already under contract. He was getting paid. Kelce's already 34 years old. He's not a young sprout. He's not a young guy anymore. And so, like, you start looking at this contract, through buku bucks at him at 38 or 34 years old. If he stays until he's 36 or until his contract's up, he's going to be 36, right? So, I mean, while I like the gesture from the Chiefs to get him to finally be the highest paid tight end, is it kind of silly to spend that money when you already have him locked and he's starting to regress in some ways?
A little bit. I would say this is, from a Chiefs perspective, more, if you dive into the numbers of the actual contract, it's really front loaded. And I think it's paying him back what probably he should have been known. He's been giving a discount to the Chiefs for a lot of years. He should have been the highest paid already. He had 7 straight 1,000-yard receiving seasons. He's been the number one option and largely considered the number one option or number one offense in the league. And if you look at the numbers, it's front loaded. It's in addition to what he was already getting paid. So he does become the highest paid per year. But I think of what the Chiefs added on, it honestly wasn't that impactful to the salary cap. So I think this was more of they had money left over. They were obviously working with Travis on getting him shirt up, but I don't think this handcuffs them at all in anything that they were trying to do going forward.
Do you think he plays the next 2 years? Do you think he plays out this contract?
No, I don't think so. I think especially if the Chiefs three-peat, I think he's done. I think he'll hang him up on a three-peat if they do that, or if they get closer. It's a long season. You know, he's looking at Taylor Swift, who's worth $1 billion. He's obviously, if he plays his cards right and marries and locks her up, he's good to go because now he doesn't need to work. He can be a stay-at-home golfing dad while she tours, and then he can just relax, which I think all of us men could empathize with being kind of the goal for all of us, is that our significant others make billions
Found
and then we
himself
get
a
to be
sugar
stay-at-home
mama.
dad.
Yeah.
So I think depending on how this season plays out, I don't think he will actually play. I think it's till 2027 is what it is now. So I think he does. I don't think there's any way he finishes out that contract.
And he's come out and said before too that the season is really long for him. Like he goes into OTAs and the preseason training camp, whatever. He's like, I don't want to do this, man. I'm 34, 35 years old. I can't do it anymore. Like, it's not fun to me. It doesn't get fun until we get to the postseason, which, hell, I mean, that's pretty much locked in stone at this point. If you're a Chiefs
what an
fan.
opportunity. Because you're locked in with Patrick Mahomes. So the likelihood of you going to the postseason is pretty damn high.
You know, Kelce getting this contract made me look up who the highest tight end or highest paid tight end was before. Can you guys guess who it is or was?
Are they currently playing?
Like currently in the
Yes.
NFL, who was the highest?
Yes.
Is it Darren Waller?
Yes.
Did he officially retire?
No.
No, nothing's came
No.
out yet. The last we heard of Darren Waller was that him and Kelsey Plum are no longer together. So
Rest in peace, man.
Which that video of her is hilarious. That little
The one
that
eating
everybody's
popcorn?
clown. Yes, that is that has to be the cringiest video I've ever seen in my life.
Agreed. I couldn't agree with you more. I
would
saw
have
that and
divorced
I was
her
like,
right after that.
I think
What
I
happened?
understand why Darren Waller got rid of her. Have you not seen that video of her
No.
eating popcorn? It is
Oh
the
my gosh.
cheesiest
Clip
freaking
this.
thing I've ever said.
Clip
Yeah.
this and add that video to her eating the popcorn, because it's like her trying to be silly and she's like on the big screen at this arena and she's like giggling eating popcorn, but it's like nobody else is in on the joke. We're like, what the fuck are you laughing at?
Yeah, it's terrible.
eating it like provocatively or like,
No,
No,
she's just like giggling and like, ha ha.
Yeah, it's really bad.
It's bad.
I understand.
It's really bad.
Darren Waller saw that video and said, "You know what? I think our time here is done."
His
So-
wiener had to have gone back inside itself and hibernated because there's nothing that video that was doing for me.
Yeah.
Well, he's enjoying $17 million a year. So
Well,
Shout out Waller.
Darren Waller. Yeah.
yeah, to do nothing, to contemplate retirement on a Giants team that is not doing it. Well, gentlemen, we all were together for the first round of the draft, which is somewhat unlikely, just given where we're all at locationally. But thankfully, we were all able to spend the first round together, and it was exciting. It was there were some twists, there were some turns, there were some expectations that were met for some teams and not met for some teams. I'd like to start out by just briefly talking about the elephant in the room that is Michael Penix. Is that okay if we start there, or did you guys want to start somewhere else?
Let's do it. Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Michael Penix, the elephant in the room. This offseason, and I don't know if anybody, look, we're NFL fans, right? We're very obviously passionate NFL fans because we sit here and we talk to each other for an hour at least once a week. I don't know if the average NFL fan knows this, but the Atlanta Falcons, they signed a quarterback this offseason, gentlemen. His name is Kirk Cousins. He signed a 4-year, $100 million deal with the Falcons. Falcons needed a quarterback. We know that offense. They got Bijan Robinson. They got Kyle Pitts. They have Drake London. What they needed was a quarterback because Desmond Ridder wasn't it. So what did they do? They went and got Kirk O'Chains. Okay. So the Falcons go do that, right? And then the draft starts, and you start looking, and teams are all scheming on what they want to do and how they want to do this. And the Falcons have the 8th overall pick in the draft. Everybody and their mother had the Falcons taking a defensive edge rusher or a defensive lineman. That is what the team needed the most. That is what the team really strived to add some strength onto their defense, and that was what was going to do it. And gentlemen, we were all sitting there on the couch listening to Roger Goodell get booed on stage. It was a blast. And the pick announced from the Falcons was Mr. Michael Penix. Yeti, I would first like to apologize to you because Michael Penix was supposed to be a Raider. That's what was supposed to happen. And you look at the draft and you kind of start doing that little puzzle piece and where does it fit? Michael Penix was very clearly supposed to be a Raider, and what happened was he is now a Falcon. Not only this, the Falcons did not tell Kirk Cousins that they were going to do this move. They did not tell Kirk Cousins that they were going to draft a quarterback with the 8th overall pick. There have been videos that have been played showing the GM having to sit there and explain his reasoning for the pick, and it was this. We don't expect or we don't anticipate being this high in the draft in the future, so we went ahead and drafted our quarterback now, which I think is a great excuse, but it's still not the right call in my mind. Because here's the situation at hand. Michael Penix is 24 years old right now as a rookie. He's not going to play in this year. He's probably not going to play next year. And then after that, the Falcons, I believe, have an out on Kirk Cousins contract extension. So we're talking 2 years of Kirk Chains, meaning Michael Penix is not going to take an NFL snap as a starting quarterback, barring injury, until he's 26 years old. I don't know. I'm still sitting here scratching my head. I thought I hated the Falcons because Arthur Smith is a fucking moron, which is true. But I realized the entire Falcons organization is a poverty franchise, and what a hellacious move. I completely and vehemently disagree with this pick. I think it was absolutely silly of the Falcons to do this. I open the floor. I'm curious as to what you guys thought when this happened.
Yeah, the part about not telling Kirk is interesting. I don't know if you saw, what podcast was it? But he was talking about when the Saints were looking at Pat Mahomes, and they had Drew Brees still, and they had talked about when do you tell him, when do you not tell him, and it's like there's that little balancing act where you want to tell your quarterback that a deal's going to be made, but you're not really sure if it's going to be made, so you don't want to tell him too soon because you don't want him to know that you're thinking about it. So it's like you don't want to tell him you're thinking about another woman yet until you've committed yourself to that other woman, that you've actually thought about that other woman. But you do want to give him a heads up maybe before it happens. And we've seen this with Rodgers, where the Packers didn't give him a heads up. And listen, ultimately these organizations don't really owe it to anybody, but it is interesting when you're at odds with your starting quarterback because it already creates a dicey situation going into it. I think it's just, if you really are trying to win now, with what you had on your team, you would have added that edge rusher. You would have added another weapon to the offense. I don't think anybody would have faulted them for doing either of those things. They've been like, cool, like they got Kirk, they can move on. And I don't think the upside on Penix was so high that you're like, we got to do this. I think it was early. There was so much value at so many other places. I think it was more of a panic move, or from a GM that maybe doesn't anticipate being there long enough, at least wants to put his stamp on the team with the quarterback that he wanted. So who knows?
And, I see a lot of people comparing this move to when the Packers drafted Aaron Rodgers, when they had Brett Favre, when they drafted Jordan Love, when they had Aaron Rodgers as a starter. But the key difference between the Packers and the Falcons is that the Packers have proven that they can produce a quality quarterback, that they can develop a quality quarterback in their system. Whereas the Falcons, they've been in quarterback hell since Michael Vick left, or since Matt Ryan left. Let's be honest.
What are you trying to say about Desmond Ridder?
Oh, come on, man. I don't think I need to say too much about Desmond Ridder, but the fact that they basically said, yeah, we have our guy in Kirk Cousins, but we're not going to do anything to help him in this draft is kind of a huge slap in the face to Kirk Cousins and the whole team. If you look at who they drafted this year, aside from Michael Penix, none of these guys are day one starters. They drafted depth guys. They're not going to make a difference.
Yeah, and that begs the question, right? Because, Alan, you were talking about how the teams could, they didn't tell Aaron Rodgers. The Saints were talking about wanting to draft Mahomes, and did they tell Drew Brees? I bring all this up because is this not the perfect situation for the Falcons to be able to have that conversation with Kirk Cousins? I mean, realistically, you look at the situation at hand. Yes, they signed him to a 4-year, $100 million deal, but it's not like Kirk Cousins has even taken a snap with the Falcons yet, right? And so can you not have that conversation? Kirk Cousins is not their franchise quarterback. Kirk Cousins is not
exactly.
Why can you now? Aaron Rodgers, Aaron Rodgers was their franchise quarterback. Maybe having a conversation with him and giving a heads up would probably be a courteous thing to do. But when you sign this quarterback in the offseason, why can't you not?
Yeah, you bring up some good points. Kirk obviously understands his place in the world at this point. He's recovering from an Achilles injury. He's largely he's an aging mercenary quarterback at this point. He's hanging on. He's just trying to sign contracts at this point and contribute in any way he can because he knows the clock's ticking on his career. That would have been the easiest conversation in the world for the Falcons to have. Hey, we know you're here. We're glad you're here because we would like you to help bring along Michael Penix. We see something in him that we can leverage that we'd love to have on this team. He gives us a dimension that we'd love to have in the future. We don't think he's here yet, but we would love for you to take him under your wing. The other thing I don't know is the largely the report about the agent not knowing, like that was leaked on air. We haven't heard anything directly from his agent, or have we? I haven't been following that as close since that initial blurb went out where it was posted on where he's like, oh, we haven't told his agent. I don't know. Have we heard anything from Kirk? Have we heard anything from his agent yet on this?
No,
I
not
know.
officially.
Yeah.
So it's largely a lot of hearsay from just like one reporter saying that Kirk didn't know. So I don't know. Like I don't know what he knew. So I guess I would like to rewind. What did the Falcons say to Kirk when they were bringing him to Atlanta initially? What was the promise of actually bringing him in? Besides the money, what were they telling him what their plan was? That's what I would be interested.
I mean, but you look. This is really a difficult conversation to have because if you're sitting there talking to somebody like Derek Carr from and look, Derek Carr is not a great quarterback, but if it was Derek Carr, you're going to try and sell him on you're our next guy, right? But you look at somebody like Kyle Pitts, like there's a significant age gap there. And I think all parties have to be somewhat aware of the situation at hand. Like, I don't think Kirk Cousins is that naive. I refuse to believe that. So you're allowed to have those conversations. But the fact that the rumors are even spreading around makes me tend to believe that they're probably true.
Probably. So let me ask this question then. To put a bow on this, what is the only way that Atlanta would come out as victors in this decision? What is the path where everybody would look back on this decision and be like, you know what? We get it. This
Kirk
makes
Cousins
sense.
Tears his Achilles week 4. Enter in Penix, and Penix kills it. That would be the best case scenario for Penix. But I want to also state this. I feel really bad for Michael Penix. Like, truly, I feel really bad for him because we're sitting here having this conversation. NFL media talking heads are having this conversation. Fantasy football players are having this. Everybody's having this conversation. The dude didn't fucking ask to get drafted by the Falcons, right? So, like, to sit here from his perspective, I feel really bad because he's like, we're all sitting here almost like shitting on him, and it's not his fault, right? Like, he didn't ask to do any of this. So I don't know. I truly do feel pretty bad for Michael Penix because he was supposed to go to the Raiders. I firmly believe that.
Second question. If Kirk Cousins wasn't there, would this be a good landing spot for Penix?
Oh, yeah. This would be a perfect landing spot. And we'd be talking about him as like a QB2, QB3 as far as like dynasty rankings go.
Yeah. So largely what we're saying is like a financial standpoint, this makes absolutely no sense for the Falcons to do this. But from a fit perspective, I don't know. This is where I'm trying to see the positive in this, and I want to see like the juxtaposition to all of this to say like what would make this successful for the Falcons. I agree with you. I think what Brandon's saying and what you just said slaps on a lot of it is like Kirk's health. Like, what if he just shits the bed? Because you still have a lot of young talent on this team that can win in a division that's still largely, in flux, where there hasn't been too much of somebody putting their stamp on it. So there's a lot of opportunity. Maybe the GM's right. Maybe they aren't going to be picking that high again. Because what if this does end up playing out this way, and then everybody's gonna be like, you know what a crystal ball move to pick Michael Penix while Kirk is still unable to play and contribute like we thought.
But then again, couldn't we go back on the GM and be like, hey, you paid a 30-something-year-old quarterback coming off a torn Achilles injury $100+ million. You're an idiot.
That might be the bigger problem. Not that they took Penix, it's that they actually signed Kirk to that amount. So I think what the GM, if we want to jump into his brain, this might be him trying to undo the boneheaded move of Penix signing Kirk Cousins to the deal that he did. Like, I think this is what this draft really signaled was, I don't think Kirk's going to be available, which I think might be a peek behind the curtain because I don't think he is going to be ready. And we do need to get some talent.
So you just paid $100 million for this guy to sit here and teach Michael Penix how to be an NFL quarterback?
Yeah, well, the one thing you don't want to do with a bad move is double down on it. So if you take an edge rusher, and you know that Kirk Cousins isn't going to work out, now you're really hosed because now you just double down.
Yeah, but we'd be sitting here writing him a pass. Like, that's what we would do is be like, well, yeah, Kirk Cousins did tear his Achilles last year, so we're waiting for him to get healthy. And we would all sit here and be like, yeah, nope.
desperate men will do desperate things, and if he knows something we all don't, which could be that Kirk isn't going to be ready, like then this move makes a little bit more sense in that realm.
So,
but the bigger
let's look
thing
at
isn't drafting Penix, it's that they signed Kirk. I think we're just going back months saying like this is just such a shit move they made.
Correct, because now what happens if in the event that Kirk Cousins isn't ready and they roll Michael Penix out and Michael Penix actually looks pretty damn good, then you look like a moron because like you mentioned, then you're sitting there paying him a bunch of money. So I mean, you can flip the conversation either way here. Overall, at the end of the day, just looking at the situation at hand, I don't love it. I don't love them because they did the Kirk Cousins thing, right? They did that one first. If that is what you decided to do there in that moment is bring in Kirk Cousins with the 8th overall pick in the draft, you don't draft a quarterback. If you made this decision the first time around, then you stick with that decision and you do something else here, and that's why I don't really love it. So, and then let's continue the train here. The aftershock, so to speak, of Michael Penix going to the Falcons is, of course, Brock Bowers to the Raiders, which I don't love that spot for him. I think it makes sense. I've struggled.
You're a fantasy player.
I am a fantasy player, but I also recognize what the Raiders are here in my mind, and I'm curious here to pick your brain. But you look at this, the Raiders, they don't have a lot of pass catchers. I mean, they have Devontae Adams, who's the best wide receiver in the NFL, but he's getting older, right? You drafted Michael Mayer last year, so I think a lot of people, especially even Raiders fans, when they picked this, it was kind of like a best available move based upon kind of what they were looking at, because they did sign a tight end last year, and I think they really were planning on drafting Michael Penix. But you look, like I said, you look at the pass catchers for the Raiders, and I think overall it still makes sense, because I think Brock Bowers, I've seen a lot of reports and rumors and thoughts, and I'm going to turn this over to you, Yeti, but I've seen like he could be lining up in kind of like, Mark Andrews does in the slot at times and be used in a lot of different ways and a lot of different blocking schemes and passing schemes. So overall, I look at it is, while he's a tight end, and for us fantasy football deviants that like to play that, I think it's okay. I think it's fine. I think it was a good signing for the Raiders with that kind of best available position. And so and they have a tight end now, a top tier upper echelon tight end for the next 5 years.
So my initial thought on Brock Bowers going to the Raiders was that this was not a good pick, because I was under the impression that they would go after a tackle if they couldn't get Penix, which they addressed the tackle room later on in the draft. So that's fine. But as I kind of sat on it and read more into what this Raiders offense is going to look like, I fell in love with this pick with Brock Bowers going to the Raiders, because as you kind of mentioned, Slaps, in college, he played over 50% of the snaps in slot and online. So he's kind of that Mark Andrews body type, where he's going to go outside, but he can play inline, and he can also block. Luke Getsy is a Raiders offensive coordinator now, coming over from Chicago. And if you look at what Luke did in Chicago, he ran the most 2 tight end sets in the NFL last year. So that kind of, I think Brock Bowers is going to be a perfect fit there alongside Michael Mayer, who was drafted under a Dave Ziegler and McDonald. I can't even fucking remember the Raiders head coach last year. McDaniels, yeah. Mayer was drafted under that front office. So he truly wasn't this general manager and Antonio Pierce's draft pick. So I feel bad for Michael Mayer, but he's kind of, water under the bridge at this point. But I do think there is a world in which they can both succeed in a Luke Getsy offense, especially when you have Aiden O'Connell or Gardner Minshew at quarterback. It's kind of an easy blanket, especially with a guy like Brock Bowers.
Yeah, I think that's what I was going to say, Yeti, was that the Mayer last year, he had 300 yards receiving and 2 touchdowns. So he wasn't exactly lighting the world on fire, but a lot of that was just due to the offense, how it was set up with Aiden O'Connell. And I think we talk about teams that are rebuilding, you build the lines, and that's exactly what I was going to say about Bowers. Bowers does give you that presence inside where he can block. He's a big body. He can give you what you need in that 11 personnel, but then he can go out and catch those intermediate routes and loosen up those linebackers a little bit so they aren't downhill. And honestly, if Mayer isn't the safety blanket that they want, I get it. I think the drafting best available makes total sense for the Raiders. The thing for me that was interesting during the draft when this all played out, because Penix went at 8, and then we knew the Bears were going to take Rome at that point. and then the Vikings trade up and take JJ, and I think the Raiders or the Broncos were going to probably could have taken one of those. Now afterwards, it sounds like the Broncos were really in love with Bo Nix, but I'm happy for that for them. And then unfortunately for the Raiders, I'm happy they didn't get Penix, because I would have hated to see Penix with that offense, because I think he can throw the deep ball. And then you look at what Devontae Adams is to that offense, you're like, oof. Devontae Adams now even shoots up even higher for that offense. And I think that I think it would have elevated Mayer and elevated everybody else. But for that pick, for what was there, I think it was smart to take the best available for that offense.
Yeti, Holty M, a.k.a. Scotty. We got to work on your name there, buddy. He says, Yeti, which Raiders quarterback is going to be the guy this year? Seems hard not to start Minshew Mania.
I think the complete opposite. I think it's going to be hard not to start Aiden O'Connell, who's a locker room guy. He's loved in the locker room, and he's won with the Raiders. I'm not saying he's an elite quarterback by any means, but I think you have to roll him out to begin with, unless Gardner Minshew is just lighting it up in preseason. But I think Aiden O'Connell is going to get the nod to start the preseason games, maybe even week 1, week 2. And then if he can't produce, they're going to switch over to Gardner Minshew. But I expect that leash to be kind of short if he can't produce.
Scotty brings up a good point. He says Minshew is a Pro Bowler.
So is Tyler Huntley.
That's not a measure of success. That was the dumbest thing.
No, I think it's more just poking fun at the title of Pro Bowl. I do have a question, though, for you, Yeti, in regards to your quarterback situation. Alan gave his thoughts, but like, would you have been excited to have Penix there as your quarterback? Like, would you have been?
Oh, yeah.
Good with that? Okay.
Yeah, man. I've said on this podcast multiple times that Michael Penix would be a perfect fit for what the Raiders need on offense. They need somebody who can make all the throws, whether it's a short check down pass or a deep shot, which he did a lot with Jalen Polk, and then he did a lot with Ondunes in Washington. Like, the guy has a cannon for an arm. I think his skill set is the best out of the rookie quarterbacks. And he would have been, like I said, I think he would have been a QB2, QB3 if he went to the Raiders in dynasty formats. But now we're talking about a guy who's going to get drafted late in rookie drafts.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, I'm going to open the floor here, and I don't know if we want to talk about like the biggest winners and losers of the draft. Is that kind of the direction you guys would like to go here? Because we've kind of left this open for more of a free form show today.
Yeah, let's dive into it.
Yeah, I we kind of brought up Bo Nix, and I want to talk to you guys about Bo Nix. Given his landing spot in Denver, do you think Denver is any better this year, or do you think this kind of sets the franchise back a little bit by going with Bo Nix at the 12 spot?
Yeah, I mean, you look, you're asking the guy who has an absolute deep hatred for Sean Payton. So I don't know if I'm going to try and leave the biasy aside, but I lean towards this not being a great move for the Broncos. Bo Nix was not like it. There were rumors that have come out that Sean Payton, this was always his second best quarterback on his board, and he was super excited, and Bo Nix was their target the whole time. That's fine. If that's the way you feel, Sean Payton, that's okay. Because honestly, what have you done in the NFL without Drew Brees? That's my question to you. I don't think Sean Payton's a great head coach, and I think that, you know, we've joked about the Broncos before the draft about how they're going to roll out a bunch of high school kids to play for them because they don't have a roster. I still tend to agree with that. I like, this does nothing for me. I don't know why you wouldn't ride Russell Wilson out, because you're already paying the guy, and just try and get some talent elsewhere. And you know that the quarterback room is an issue, but wait and address it to the point where you absolutely can't not address it. But I think that Bo Nix isn't going to be great. I hope I'm wrong, because I don't ever root for anybody to sit here and fail. But he wasn't my top quarterback that I had when I was watching all the film, and I don't think it's going to be a great situation for the Broncos. I think Jerry Jeudy, you know, Jerry Jeudy's a weird one, because he's had like spike years where he's been great, and then he's had years where he's been absolutely irrelevant. I feel bad for Jerry Jeudy because he's been kind of tossed around with playing with different quarterbacks every year and gone through a bunch of head coaching changes, and now he's not on the team anymore, right? So what did they do? They went and got Troy Franklin, who I do like that move, pairing him with Bo Nix, because they both played together at Oregon, and hopefully you're going to try and find some of that chemistry there. But overall, I don't have the Broncos doing anything great this year, and I don't think it was a franchise-changing pick for them.
Yeah, if you look at the quarterback room that they have basically 4 quarterbacks that are almost the same in my eyes. They have Nix, Jarrett Stidham, Zach Wilson, and Ben DiNucci. And I think Bo Nix just fits into one of those 4 where, like, I don't think he's going to elevate the play of anybody else on that roster. And I think if you're taking a quarterback in the first round, or if you're making the moves, if you're Denver, that's what you're trying to do. I was excited that Denver took Bo Nix, because I don't think Bo Nix is the sum of his parts that he had at Oregon. He wasn't the difference maker. They had a great system. They had a great roster. They were solid on the lines. They afforded the opportunities for Bo Nix to be able to do what he needed to do with a ton of time. And he can make the throws, but even if you go back to how he played at Auburn, like, he didn't do anything uberly impressive. I think he was largely. I would, if we could get some Auburn fans on here, I think they would have some words about how Bo Nix was for their team. And so you fast forward now, and I thought it was hilarious that Sean Payton was high and mighty thinking like they got some sort of steal. And I'm like, he's not going to elevate Cortland Sutton. He's not going to elevate Josh Reynolds. He's not going to elevate Mims. Like, they have to elevate him. And are they going to be able to do that with what they have? I don't think so. And Troy Franklin largely may not even be a day one starter. So he also is going to be a little bit of a project for that team to put on the field. So now you have 2 offensive additions and projects for that team. I think the underrated addition was Estime at running back. I really like that pick for him because I liked him as a running back, and I think that should be more of a focus. Like, they should have spent more there. So, but it goes back to your point. They should have just kept Russell Wilson at this point, because they're no closer to success with drafting a first-round quarterback. If you would have said Broncos are going to draft a first-round quarterback, is that going to be better than Russell Wilson? Blindly, you probably would have said, well, yeah, I hope so. And then you see it's Bo Nix, and you're like, no, that's not what we thought. That's not what we had in mind, because we all thought they were going to trade up.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, we did.
And they sat there and got a quarterback that I don't think anybody else wanted in the first round.
No.
I think the draft worked out exactly how Denver wanted it to go, because now, with Atlanta taking Penix, nobody has to worry about shitting on Denver Raiders, because they got Bo Nix at 12.
I'll still shit on Denver.
Oh yeah, I will too. But like the light is on Penix and the Falcons, and not with the Broncos and Nix at 12.
If the Broncos were smart, if you could rewind, and if they were to play this out, they would have kept Russ. They would have tried to keep the team together as much as we can. But hey, take the L. Wasn't a great year. They could have drafted Bowers. Now you're adding Bowers to a team that has Judy, Sutton, and you still have Russell Wilson. Now you're cooking a little bit, because now you have something to look forward to as an offense and as a team. But now all you did was you got rid of Russ. You took Bo Nix, which is largely a downgrade from Russ, in my opinion, even though Russ wasn't – he had that 1 year, his first year in Denver, which really wrote the script. But last year he was productive. So now I think you took a step back in the quarterback room. You didn't really add anything day one startering to your offense. And now you're just like, now what do we do?
That's what I don't understand is you look at what the Broncos did. They got their ass absolutely demolished this last season by the Dolphins. The Dolphins beat the absolute piss out of them, right? And ever since that game, things kind of started to change for the Broncos. I'm not going to say they were a great team, but like they were actually competing in games. And it was like, oh, Russell Wilson, he's finally warming up the burners. Like he might actually cook something here at some point. And then right after that, they're like, later, dude, we're throwing you out. We'll still pay you, but you can go find a new team. And I'm just like, I agree with you. And they signed Zach Wilson, or they trade for Zach Wilson, which is also a head scratcher. And when that happened, I was like, okay, they're not going to take a quarterback. And I was like, that makes sense, right? You didn't get anything you traded Zach Wilson for pennies. You know that you're in a quarterback purgatory. Build the lines. It's not sexy. Build the lines. Do something to set yourself up for the future that's not Bo Nix. I don't know. I thought the Broncos, I think the Falcons definitely had one of the worst drafts, but I think the Broncos weren't too far behind him.
So to corroborate that, we did have a list compiled here by Renee Budgener on X. I believe that's how he says his name. Apologies if he ever listens to this and I just butchered his name.
He's a fan.
He compiled basically the post-draft rankings from all of the major sites like NFL.com, USA Today, Fox Sports, and he ranked every team 1 through 32 based on how their drafts went. We'll start with the bottom because we were just talking about the Broncos and the Falcons. So the bottom 5 that he had based on an aggregate of all of these sites was and this is in reverse order, so I'll say the last place last is Broncos, Titans, Panthers, Browns, and Falcons, as they had as having the absolute worst drafts. And if you look at like the discussion we just had, like just question marks, like financially making decisions and then making draft picks to like not support your decisions you just made financially are very awkward. And then you like added pieces that maybe won't even be day one starters, and you're like, who let you pick that high in the draft? You guys sucked and you're picking that high in the draft, and then you still sucked. Like, how? This is NFL's trying to help you by giving you the ability to pick that high, and then you still fucked it up. So like, what are we doing?
You can't fix stupid.
And the reverse of that is, and I'm sure we can share this graphic on X later, because I think it's interesting to see how all these teams, and I know Adam had commented on the Packers, which it'll be interesting to see their grade. But the top 5 drafts he had were the Steelers at number 1, Bears number 2, Eagles number 3, Commanders number 4, Chiefs number 5. Honorable mention to the Cardinals at number 6 as having the top 6 drafts. Out of those top 6, who do you think maybe doesn't belong there if you're looking at it just off first glance?
Commanders, probably.
Maybe the Steelers.
Steelers being number 1 was interesting. Having the best draft is like a quiet best draft, if anything.
I will say I like what Washington did this year. Obviously getting Jaden Daniels in the first round, but then they went out and got some offensive pieces to help him. And I think that's going to be huge, obviously, for his success.
Yeah.
So I like where Washington is in this list. Aside from the Eagles' first 2 picks, like do you guys think any of their other picks are like impactful?
I'm glad you brought up the Eagles. Our good friend Nick Wright, who's Chiefs homer through and through, and largely annoys me more than he excites me, even though he's a Chiefs homer. He had a good rant today about the Eagles, because there was an article that was published that basically said Howie Roseman's just been cooking these last 3 drafts. Like, look at all this value he's getting. And then they dove into it on their show. But really, if you looked at it, Howie Roseman basically just follows what all of the pundits think are the top picks in the draft. So Howie Roseman's just basically doing what all of the media says you should be doing, not necessarily what NFL teams like are actually doing or where there's value. And if you look at those picks, like, they're widely heralded and like he gets good quote unquote value. But then if you look at how some of those draft picks have panned out, like they're largely kind of like mid undetermined returns or like negative. And so I always think that's interesting, because we celebrate the Eagles time over time. But if you look at where they've made a lot of their hay, like largely it was prior to Howie, or it was bringing in somebody like AJ Brown, which wasn't even a draft pick. So I thought that was interesting juxtaposition on how we view some of these. And so grain of salt with everything that we're saying on this podcast, because I mean, these NFL teams spend a lot of time dissecting who these players are and where they should go. And so I think it would be interesting to do a postseason recap at the end to see like, oh, were we right? Like, were these guys actually contributing, or were we all just largely idiots and full of shit and didn't know exactly what we were saying?
Hey, and let's not forget that he drafted Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson in 2020. So I don't think it gets any worse than that, man.
No, it's interesting.
I mean, I'm trying to put my bias aside here with the Cardinals, but I as a fan of them, I was really happy with this draft, to be honest. I wish I would have seen a little bit more moving up. We had a lot of draft capital this year, and we have a lot of holes to fill, but like we've traded back once, maybe twice, and I'm just like, why are we trading back here? Like, if anything, trade up. Like, let's make a couple trade up moves, especially from the defensive standpoint. And I know this class was not nearly as defensively heavy as far as talent perspective, but you could have traded up. So I would have liked to see the Cardinals. I think Marvin Harrison, super excited to have him. And I think we all kind of knew that was coming. Kind of sucks. If anybody is interested in purchasing a Marvin Harrison jersey, you can't, because he has still not signed his NFL OPA agreement, and they're not selling his jersey on any stores right now. So if you see anybody walking around with a Marvin Harrison jersey, it's fake. And I just want to let you know that.
Shout out Jenna jersey.
Shout out, yeah. Well, we can't.
Shout out,
no free ads. No free ads.
Shout out, Jenna.
But I do like what we did there, and
I'll tell you what I like. Yeah. What the Cardinals did was with Trey Benson from Florida State, the running back. Like, I think that is a sneaky good add to that offense that I think you'll see play out during the regular season as a contributor. I know Marvin Harrison will obviously get his flowers, but I think what you did on defense and adding Trey, I think that was really impactful pieces all the way around. I thought it was a solid draft. I thought I was excited for you. I know you were pumped after you took Marvin Harrison Jr. because I knew you were worried that you guys were going to totally mess that up, but I think it worked out for the large part. The other thing we're talking about draft day that was surprising to me is why are teams still helping the Chiefs? Why did the Bills?
Not only why are teams still helping the Chiefs?
Bills and
why
the 49ers
are the Bills helping
and the
Chiefs?
49ers and the 49ers help? So literally the two teams that largely over the last 4 or 5 years have been smited by the Chiefs. The 49ers twice in the Super Bowl, Buffalo Bills in the playoffs. How are they still helping the Chiefs? They helped the Chiefs get Xavier Worthy. And then the 49ers helped the Chiefs get, I'm not going to say his name, lineman from BYU, who's just an athletic freak, with somebody they needed at tackle. And it's like, why are teams helping? Like, who is trading with it? I assume nobody's trading with the Chiefs at this point. You go back to back, and I assume it's just there's a powwow amongst the other 31 teams to be like, no, fuck these guys. We're not giving them anything. Let's just try to take players we don't even want just so they don't have them. Like, whatever, guys, let's just do it because we don't want.
There's a guy in our dynasty league for fantasy football that's won the last 2 years, and I'm like very hesitant to do trades with him. And this is like a dynasty fantasy football league. Like in the real NFL, I could not believe we were all sitting there when it happened, when Xavier Worthy went off the board. The Bills were on the clock, and then all of a sudden the Chiefs switched to the Chiefs logo, and we're all just like, what?
Of all teams,
what in the hell?
How was it the Chiefs and the Bills
to get a wide receiver? Not only to get a wide receiver, the Bills also needed a wide receiver. Like, it just blew my mind.
Brandon Bean, the Bills GM, he was on the Sirius XM radio yesterday, and I was listening to him talk about this trade, and he was saying that he had been in conversations with Josh Allen about what he wanted to do with that first round pick, or like what wide receiver he really wanted to get. So Josh Allen was sold on the Bills getting Keon Coleman. And Brandon Bean, the GM, he knew that Keon Coleman would fall out of the first round, or that he wouldn't need to draft Keon Coleman with the 28th pick. So he said, okay, we're going to trade out and get as much value as we can. And so they traded back to the first spot in the second round, and they were able to get Keon Coleman. I'm not saying that's correct, but that's what he said. That's how he viewed the
short-sighted move, because part of drafting somebody in the first round is you get the 5th-year option.
Yeah.
So if you were truly sold on him at wide receiver and you wanted him to be around, now you only have him for 4 years. Now the window's even shorter on anybody outside of that first round, which, yes, he might have been, but they did not like they got like a ton of capital on the other end where they're just like wheeling and dealing all these picks. Like a lot of it was 1-for-1s, especially with the Chiefs. It was like minimal upgrades on maybe a few rounds and a few spots. So like, that's also dumb if you really think Keon Coleman's going to be the future, because now you've shortened your window on when you're going to have to renegotiate with him. And we talked about this wide receiver market resetting. So now you're going to have that conversation in 3 years instead of 4. And now you're like, clock's ticking to show
it's a bad
what you
situation.
Need. It was just I thought it was just I thought it was a short-sighted move on their end to just draft, and especially with the Chiefs. Like, why are you helping the Chiefs? Of all teams, you're going to have to face them again in the playoffs. And now you just have to pray to God that Xavier Worthy does nothing in that game against you, because you don't want to see it.
You mentioned Xavier Worthy. I would just like to briefly touch on that. I obviously, like I mentioned, we were all together, but what are your thoughts on them signing Xavier Worthy? He was the fastest guy at the NFL Combine, and speed kills, right?
I would have rather had a different wide receiver. I would have rather gone for a big body wide receiver. I get why they wanted him. Post-draft discussion, you see how they were sold on division of Deshaun Jackson with Xavier Worthy. It seems like that's the direction they want to go with him, kind of being this X factor guy, which if it plays out, it plays out. But he did have some drop issues, but he was still largely productive and healthy at Texas. It's not like he didn't do anything in college and then just ran a 4.2 and now let's go draft him. Like, he was very productive in college. So there is some optimism there. As a Chiefs fan, I had mixed reactions. Now it's kind of like, okay, cool. Let's see if we can scheme him up. I think if there's any team that could scheme him up, it's Andy Reid and the Chiefs. So for him, he fell to the perfect spot, because I think if he would have went anywhere else, he could have largely been in the pitfall of the John Rosses of the world, where it's a super fast guy, doesn't pan out. I do love the arguments on Twitter that like, look at all these fast guys, you don't want any of them, and I'm like, yeah, you do. You still want them. Like, even though it like drafting in general is hit and miss. You could look at any segment of time and be like 40 times and be like, oh, this is hit or miss. I think
wide receiver hit rate statistically, I want to say is right under 50% for a first round wide receiver to actually hit. And the metric that they use is did they get signed to a second contract? So
yeah.
And I think it's important to note with the speed too that the kickoff rules have changed this year. And so the people are going to be returning kicks at a much higher rate than we've seen over the past 5-10 years. So you add a guy like Xavier Worthy, maybe he's not just a starting wide receiver. Maybe he's a starting kick returner, punt returner, and maybe they can utilize him in that way to get an extra touchdown or get shorter possessions.
It's what Reed said. He said special teams, he's going to help us as well. So I know they obviously had a broader plan other than just being like a wide receiver. And he doesn't need to be the wide receiver one, assuming Rashee Rice has like a 4-game suspension, maybe 6. I don't think it's going to be much longer than that. That's still a good chunk of the season. But, I mean, it also gives the opportunity to work Xavier Worthy in. So this actually could honestly be a blessing in disguise again for the Chiefs, having a wide receiver suspended, because it forces them to work Xavier Worthy into the offense maybe a little bit more, lather him up, and then you bring Rashee Rice back, who knows the offense. Now he's had an additional 6 weeks of like rest before kicking off the season, so who knows? It could end up playing out, but largely I think it's an interesting thing with that, but I think it's far from a foregone conclusion that this was totally positive for the Chiefs to get Xavier Worthy.
A wide receiver we haven't touched on yet that went right before Xavier Worthy. Whoops, sorry, microphone issues. Is Brian Thomas Jr. going to the Jaguars at the 23rd pick. What do you guys think about Brian Thomas Jr.'s landing spot?
I want to know what you think, because I already know what you think, Yeti. Why don't you tell us how we should feel about Brian Thomas Jr.? You tell us how we should feel.
So when Brian Thomas Jr. got drafted to the Jaguars on Thursday night, I told everybody that he's basically just Gabe Davis I can catch. And if ESPN was showing the highlights of Brian Thomas Jr. in the background, and I was like, do you see all these routes that he's running right now? They're legit all vertical routes. Have you seen a single play of him cutting at the line and creating separation? No. Straight vertical route, vertical threat type of guy, which he's a bigger body guy that can definitely stretch the field, which is great for Jacksonville, but they also just signed Gabe Davis.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Can Brian Thomas Jr. catch better than Gabe Davis? Does he have actual hands and doesn't try and catch with his fingertips? Because
as of right now, he has 0 drops in the NFL, so yeah.
Hold on. Maybe they should try this. Do 2 vertical routes side by side, have them run as fast as they can together, throw a ball in between them, and even if one bobbles, maybe the other one can actually catch it, or maybe they both bobble it, but maybe you just up your catch success rate because one of them's going to bobble it and the other one can just be there to catch it. That could be an option.
I thought you were just going to have them do that in practice, and whoever gets it gets the starting spot.
They're just going to run blitz every play.
They're just, I was going to say, they're just going to run NFL blitz, just all go.
Yeah. I mean, Christian Kirk, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but just thinking about Jaguars games, like he plays in the slot a little bit more, or he did when he was with the Cardinals. So I don't know. I don't love that pick. I mean, if we want to talk about wide receivers that really are like, I think a little too early, like Leggett, I don't love his spot with the Panthers. I don't love that draft pick. I think they needed wide receiver help, and I understand that, but he's kind of, I don't know. I didn't love that pick for them. He's a big body guy who just kind of also runs straight, and I think he'll help stretch the field. I think that's kind of the Panthers' hope there, but didn't fall in love with him, and I would have liked to see a more versatile wide receiver go to the Panthers instead.
I will say, as far as
go ahead.
As far as like dynasty goes and ranking these rookie wide receivers, I do have Brian Thomas Jr. over Worthy. I think there's a lot of overreaction with Worthy going to the Chiefs just because he is playing with Mahomes and people are saying, oh, he's going to be a perfect fit because we saw what Tyreek could do. We've seen Deshaun Jackson in this type of offense before, which is all great and dandy. But you also have to consider the target share that Xavier Worthy is probably not going to get. I don't think he's going to see more than like 60 targets this season, if we're being completely honest, with the guys that are there with the Chiefs. But if you look at Brian Thomas Jr. with Jacksonville, over 100 targets are open now with Calvin Ridley gone, and they're going to have to fold Gabe Davis into the mix somewhere, obviously. But I don't think it's out of the question that Brian Thomas Jr. takes over as wide receiver 1 there.
Yeah, I think you're right. The Xavier Worthy thing's funny because I remember even we first started doing this. Slaps, was very adamant about like don't draft any of the Chiefs because you don't know who's going to get the ball. And largely, like I never really draft players from my favorite team just because I don't like having the double negative. Like if the Chiefs lose and then my fantasy team loses because the Chiefs lost, then it's like salt in the wound. So I try to avoid that at all costs just for my sanity. But I think you're right. Xavier Worthy, from a pure football standpoint, makes a ton of sense because it's an added weapon where they can have a wrinkle in the offense to give separation and create some gadget plays. From a fantasy standpoint, it doesn't make sense to focus on Xavier Worthy because he's still going to be down the pecking order. We saw last year, even in the divisional round, where they're doing like a sweep with Hardman and he fumbles the ball when you're on the goal line and there's Pacheco and Kelce. You're like, why are they picking that? The Chiefs generally will do just dumb shit throughout the year where you're like, why didn't you just give it to this guy? So
because they can.
You never
they can
know.
do it.
You
And
never
it
know.
doesn't really screw them over because at the end of the day, they'll fix it and figure it out at the very end. So let's have fun while we're out here.
Let's not forget, too, that the Chiefs' rookie wide receivers that they've had over the past 2 years, Sky Moore and Rashee Rice. Rashee Rice didn't see many targets up until like week 10 of last season. He was very far down on the pecking order. And then you look at Sky Moore, who his rookie season, he had like 40, 50 targets at most. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that this offense is super complex to learn. And rookie wide receivers have to they have to really study this playbook to get on the field and to earn Mahomes and Reed's trust. So I don't think it's a given that Worthy's just going to walk into the locker room and be a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 in this offense.
I think that, but I think this lends credence really quick, Yeti, to your Brian Thomas above Xavier Worthy, because I think Xavier Worthy probably is going to see more special teams than he will see actual reps, like in the offense, like cooking, getting targets and getting those PPR or touchdowns, sneaky touchdowns. I think you're right. I think that's totally fair assessment.
I don't want to get too in the weeds of fantasy football here because we're going to talk about that next week in next week's show. But I do just in a dynasty format, would you rather have Xavier Worthy or Keon Coleman?
Give me Keon Coleman.
Okay.
Is that because you drafted him?
100%.
Bias.
Truth be told, I would have taken Brian Thomas Jr. if he was available.
Okay. Would you have taken Xavier Worthy or Ladd McConkey?
Ladd McConkey, easy. I think he has a much clearer path to wide receiver 1 status.
Oh, easy.
And let's just get into it. Let's talk about this. The Chargers, very obviously, they lost their their big star wide receivers in Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. They're both off roster, leaving the wide receiver room being Joshua Palmer and Quentin Johnston, first round wide receiver draft pick from last year. Quentin Johnston didn't really work out. A lot of people this offseason were saying now is his opportunity to shine. It's time to show Jim Harbaugh what he's got. And Jim Harbaugh went ahead and drafted Ladd McConkey here. We like that pick. It sounds like you do.
I love that pick. I think they need it. They need a possession guy, especially with how they're rebuilding the team. They got Joe Alt. I think it's interesting because of how we view Herbert. I think that's the backdrop of all this is like we view Herbert as being one of the top quarterbacks in the league. And I think from a talent perspective, he is. I think wins and loss perspective, he is certainly not. And largely you could say that's on him or not on him. But, winning generally isn't a quarterback stat. It's a team thing, right? That's why even with the Mahomes arguments or whatever, like it's a team thing. Like Mahomes directly benefits from Reed and all that stuff. And I think if you look at somebody like Herbert, he's a direct reflection of what his coaching's been and what his team's been and the decisions they've made. So it's hard to fault him from any of that. So I think for Herbert, this will be interesting because it's largely been on his shoulders to like produce, get the ball downfield, which has been sexy from a fantasy perspective. I think what McConkey gives this offense, they've added 2 running backs. They're beefing up the line, and McConkey gives them that possession over the middle separation. He can get those quick, like a Hunter Renfrow, not just because he's small and white, but it gives them that feel of like, hey, I can get shifty. I can get in between the numbers. I can extend and move the chains. And so it'll be interesting for Herbert how he leans into that, not having he's got Quentin dropsies, going deep, how he leans on McConkey. I think that's where it's going to go. I think McConkey, there is 100% a path, like Yeti said, of him being the number one, like leading the wide receiver room in targets.
And I know the Chargers, they're not going to throw the ball as much as they have over the past 3-4 seasons, but Keenan Allen, who was Justin Herbert's safety blanket over the past few years, he's no longer with them. So that opens up a huge hole in that offense, especially at the slot position where McConkey fits. That's his role. He's a slot guy who's going to be open across the middle, or he can win those short, easy outside routes too. That'll benefit Herbert, especially with Harbaugh just wanting to pound the fucking rock. They're going to pound the rock, and that's going to open up the run game so much. So I think McConkey is going to be a huge beneficiary of this offense.
That's going to be the X factor, how Harbaugh, how they call this offense. Because we've seen video already of Herbert wearing a wristband with like a shit ton of plays on it, which he's never done in his career either. There's some fundamental shifts happening right now with that team that it's going to be interesting on how this team operates and moves forward. So I'll be interested to see how they keep up.
It's tough to sit here and say this, because we won't know. But if Jim Harbaugh never came in and it was still the guy who's with I can't think of his name, the offensive coordinator.
I'm not gonna be here anymore.
He was with Dallas.
This is a fun game to play live. A guy's name we can't remember.
Yeah.
Kellen
Moore. Thank you.
Yeah.
Jeez, I was struggling here. If Kellen Moore hadn't left and the Brandon Staley regime was still there, would it change your mind a little bit, or not change your mind, but would you have Ladd McConkey maybe like entering the first round conversation in front of Brian Thomas Jr.? Or I guess what I'm trying to say is, do you guys think that because there's a new regime and we don't really know 100% what that looks like, Ladd may have fallen off because we're just expecting Jim Harbaugh to run more? So that's kind of why Brian Thomas Jr. maybe win over Ladd? Or do you guys truly believe that Brian Thomas Jr. is higher in Ladd as far as for fantasy football?
Are you talking like second round of the NFL draft or like rookie drafts?
For like rookie drafts, I guess. And like I said, I don't want to get too far in the weeds here, but you're looking. It is a genuine question because a lot of people, ourselves included, are drafting right now. We saw Ladd McConkey go all the way down to the second round, but if we knew if we had a little bit more insight into what this offense might look like going into this, do we think maybe we would be a little bit more interested in grabbing him before someone like Brian Thomas Jr.?
I think it's right. I think you're right. I think it's Harbaugh. It's the unknown of what this and if you go back and look at how his offenses typically have looked, you look at Michigan, you look at Stanford, you look at San Francisco, like they did throw the ball, but there was a lot of running. It was a lot of downhill running. It was a lot of play action. It was a lot of like methodical, grinded out type shit. And, that's where JJ McCarthy, there's like mixed bag because he didn't have to throw it down the field as much. And it was a lot of at the lines. And you see this Chargers team, you look at who they took in the first round as a lineman. That kind of gives you an indication of where they want to go. Yeah. And they signed 2 running backs. And so I think this is where I was saying, where if Ladd was on this team with Kellen Moore prior, I think without a doubt, Ladd is all the way up there because he's going to get looks, he's going to get targets, where they want to go. Now with Harbaugh, you don't know how much he's actually going to like be force fed the ball, if at all. Like, is he going to be a third option, fourth option in the offense, depending on what they do with the tight ends and how they use Johnson and what they end up doing with, the offensive scheme. So I think that's exactly what it is, but go ahead, Yeti.
If Justin Herbert was going to throw the ball 35 to 40 times a game like he did under Kellen Moore, I think Ladd would be like a 105 type of guy. Like he'd be going in the first half of a lot of drafts, rookie drafts right now. But I don't think it's out of the question that Herbert averages like 25 to 30 pass attempts this year, obviously just depending on game script, right? But I think Harbaugh is just going to want to bleed the clock. He's going to want to run the ball, 30 to 40 times a game. And Herbert's just going to become a game manager. It's kind of how I envision this offense looking for the next couple of years, at least.
It is interesting. It's the Jim Harbaugh effect, I guess is what we'll call it.
when do you hit the panic button on Herbert though as like an asset? I know we're getting in the weeds of fantasy. Like even like in redraft.
Can we put a bookmark on that? Because I really
let me ask. Redraft formats. Are you moving Herbert up or down based on the way this offense is shaping up?
Down.
There's no way you can't down. I mean,
Herbert in my mind should not be a top 15 redraft quarterback.
I agree with that.
Spicy.
I agree with.
What a teaser for
I don't.
next
Top
episode.
15 is a little extreme.
What
but,
a teaser for next episode. I love it.
Yeah, we'll put a bookmark in it because this is a really good talking point. Last thing I have that I kind of wanted to discuss in this draft here is Ricky Parasol, and I think I spelled his name wrong here on our ticker down here, but we know who I'm talking about. The 49ers drafted him at the end of the first round here. Couple thoughts here. I think nobody had expected Ricky Pearsall to go this early. I think this was kind of a surprise draft for a lot of people. I think there was a lot of other wide receiver talent still on the board that people had expected to go sooner. Ladd McConkey, Keon Coleman. A lot of these wide receivers went at the very beginning of the second round, and Ricky Pearsall was taken before him. My question is this. Is Kyle Shanahan cooking? Thank you. Okay, I appreciate that, MK. Just forgot a damn letter. I told you I spelt it wrong. Is Kyle Shanahan cooking, gentlemen? I mean, there's a lot of looming conversations right now about Brandon Ayuk. And Brandon Ayuk wants to get paid, and it seems like he is somewhat unhappy with the 49ers right now. And then you also add the mixed bag of Deebo Samuel, who is getting a little bit older. He is not nearly as young as he was 3 years ago when they were handing him the rock like 10 to 20 times a game and also having him he was the whole team. He was getting older, right? Is there a chance, is Kyle Shanahan showing his hand a little bit here that he is about to lose one of his two wide receivers due to a cap casualty and Ricky's here to replace one of them? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's you heard those rumors before the draft where they were going to move either it was Ayuk, it was like heavy Ayuk movement, and then now it's like, oh, it's Ayuk or Deebo, and I think drafting Parasol gives them a little bit more of that, a little bit more momentum in that regard. I also think it's interesting from a 49ers perspective of how this offense attacks down the field, because you looked at their playoffs and you looked at the Super Bowl, like they largely relied on like screens, bubble screens, quick cross, like there was a lot of that happened within this offense. And I think Pearsall gives them a little bit more dimension in there. I mean, he's super athletic. He's super fast. And so I'll be interested to see how they layer him into this offense, because I think he fits in schematically with what and how they like to attack all over the field. So I think this just signals. And as somebody that drafted Pearsall in a rookie draft, I am now firmly rooting for them to move one of those guys as soon as possible.
And I know with Pearsall, he's fast and he's shifty too, but it's important to note that he's a very good blocker too. And that's something that the 49ers expect out of all their wide receivers. I mean, we constantly see highlights of Brandon Ayuk or Deebo Samuel making blocks for Christian McCaffrey. Like those are highlighted by the broadcast usually. And Pearsall, he fits that mold that the 49ers are looking for with their wide receivers. I will say Deebo's contract has an out after this season. So I wouldn't be surprised if Deebo, Ayuk are still on the roster at the end of this season and they just move on from Deebo after this year and expect Ayuk to play on like a franchise tag kind of thing, which if they do, obviously that sucks for Pearsall this year, but I mean, next year it's to the moon for Pearsall.
I like that. I mean, it's hard not to look at Kyle Shanahan, whoever from an offensive perspective Kyle Shanahan's going to draft, especially with that early first round draft capital. It's hard to sit here and say they're going to fail, right? Like you have players that were touted to be well and above Ricky Pearsall, and then landing spot dictates some of this stuff, right? Like Kyle Shanahan is a wonderful coach. Kyle Shanahan is a top 5 coach probably in the NFL. It's hard to sit there and say, when you're going to invest that much in that guy, I don't believe in what you're going to do with him. And there's a lot of people sitting here pointing finger guns at me saying, what happened with Trey Lance? We can have that conversation, but I don't know if we necessarily need to. I think this was just, this has to get you a little bit more excited and Alan, I'm sure, especially the value-wise where you got him, you were pretty happy with that.
Yeah, I was definitely excited. Isn't it funny though, real quick, post-draft, you look at where the guys were drafted and it's like, I couldn't see Keon Coleman on this 49ers team. Or like you look at some of the guys, you're like, I don't know how that fit in. But like post draft, you're like, oh yeah, I could see that guy. I get how that makes sense. Yeah. So it's funny like how you you do like a retrospect on what actually happened after the draft. You're like, yeah, this makes sense where these guys went. Like this totally works. And like for Buffalo, like largely Keon Coleman could work there, and Pearsall, like they just take their guys, man. I think it's more and more you just see that like NFL teams, they got their guys, they circle them, and then they go for them, and then that's that. And largely at the end, you're like, oh yeah, that makes a ton of fucking sense, because I couldn't see Xavier Worthy anywhere else.
Yeah,
Right.
but
Right.
last
it
week
doesn't
were we
make-
having this conversation? Like,
It
no.
doesn't make any sense. Yeah, and
Like,
now it doesn't make
imagine
any sense.
if
You're like,
he went
who
to the
else?
Panthers at the end of the first round.
Yeah.
And we're like, oh,
Like, oh,
gross.
well, yeah,
Yeah,
but
you'd
we'd
be
be
like,
like, that makes sense. But we would be sitting, because that's the new norm, right? And
Yeah.
what's weird is that these are actual human beings, right? They're going to have to go move to these cities and go do all these things, and we're just sitting here talking about them like they're chess pieces on a board. And I'm going to conclude with this. I don't know if you guys have anything else to say. Best of luck. Welcome to the NFL, rookies. We're all excited to have you here. We will talk about your fantasy football implications next week. So appreciate everybody that tuned in today. Did you guys have anything else to add before we head out?
No, I was gonna say, yeah, this rookie, I think this draft might be the last draft where we have a ton of talent top to bottom, where you're kind of drafting all over, because you look ahead, next year is going to be the first draft where we have no more real COVID guys, where you don't have these aging older guys. There's a lot of unknowns. You can look at some of the pre-drafts already for next year, and I'm like, I don't know who any of these guys are. Like, I'm really unsure of like who they're going to be, and a lot of the quarterbacks don't look great either. So you look at that with this draft, and maybe some of it makes sense, but it'll be interested to see how next year's draft goes.
That's why you got me, mijo. I'm already looking
We'll
ahead,
do it
baby.
again next year.
But real quick, we spent a lot of time talking about winners. So I'm just kind of curious what you guys think about O'Dunes and Neighbors landing spots. Do you think they're winners or losers, considering where they ended up going?
I think they're both winners, but I think that they're winners because of their talent level, not because of necessarily, at some point you have to have the conversation of talent level versus landing spot. And I think you meet in that gray area for most players. I think these guys are in a really great spot. Honestly, both of them. A lot of people are giving a lot of hatred to Neighbors, and, oh, it's a terrible landing spot. Oh, it doesn't make sense. Look, I've been saying this all offseason. Neighbors to the Giants makes a shit ton of sense, and I stand behind what I said. And obviously, I should be a GM because so do the Giants. I don't understand. Yep. Yeah, this is easy. It's just moving chess pieces. I don't understand. Look, I get it. Do I think that Daniel Jones is the Messiah? Absolutely not. But what I do think is that you have to do something on offense, because if I were to go pull up the roster of the wide receivers for the Giants for the last 2 to 3 years, it's abysmal. It's people. It's like a bunch of no names. It's a bunch of things that are like, these aren't real weapons. It's your Byron Pringles and like, it just Sterling Shepard at 40 years old. Like, it's not an exciting offense. And so you look at the problem of Daniel Jones. A lot of people don't like Daniel Jones. A lot of people are saying Daniel Jones is not a successful quarterback. My question to you is what has the Giants done to help him besides Saquon Barkley? Okay. And look, Darren Waller was supposed to be that guy. I'm sorry. Darren Waller wasn't that guy, and I'm not blaming Daniel Jones for that. Darren Waller is an injury-prone, old, veteran wide receiver who's probably not nearly as nimble as he used to be. So that didn't solve your problem. Neighbors, I think, is great. Neighbors is a big body wide receiver. I love that that Daniel Jones might actually have a real weapon now. And you needed to do something offensively to replace Saquon Barkley, and I think Neighbors was a wonderful plug-in for that. You're already paying Daniel Jones. Ride him out to the end of the contract, or else we're going to sit here and have a Russell Wilson conversation again.
Agreed.
Yeah. The only thing that scares me with Malik Neighbors is the fact that this could be Dable's last season with the Giants. And then we're starting a whole domino effect of there's a new offense, there's a new playbook. But Slaps, I tend to agree with you that talent wins out in these kind of situations. And when you have a guy like Malik Neighbors, you're going to tailor your offense to a guy like that, and you're going to get the ball in his hands no matter what.
Right.
Just look at guys like Chris Olave with Derek Carr. Look at Garrett Wilson with Zach Wilson for the start of his career. Drake London. The list goes on with these quality wide receivers and shitty quarterbacks, but they still find ways to produce, and they're highly involved in their offense. So I think Neighbors I wouldn't say he's a loser, but if he would have went to the Chargers, I'd be like, fuck yeah, like Neighbors to the moon.
Sure.
But right now I'm just kind of chilling. I'm chilling on Neighbors.
Alex Davis 3 over on Instagram says, the Giants win in the Super Bowl for sure.
For sure.
Not
For sure.
Not sure I agree with that.
You heard it here
calling it.
first.
Yeah, and then we talk about Odunze. Not a great landing spot. Not a great landing spot solely because
Why?
you already have Keenan
You're
Allen.
thinking fantasy. You're thinking fantasy.
No. You gotta let me finish. You have Keenan Allen, and you have Mr. I'm spacing.
DJ Moore.
Thank you. Jeez. You have DJ Moore, and then you went and signed a running back this offseason, DeAndre Swift, who's supposedly going to be pretty good for you. You have Cole Kmet. There's a lot of mouths to feed, and now Odunze is the wide receiver 3 on the board. What I do love about this pick is the fact that the Bears they're looking to pair 2 franchise guys in both Odunze and Williams, and I love that. I think that was such a smart move by them. Honestly, if I was a Bears fan right now, I would be absolutely ecstatic
100%.
for this upcoming season because your team has finally done some of the right things to really get all these puzzle pieces in a very nice orderly line for you to go out and try and actually do something. Question at hand now is can the coaching staff do it? And I think that
No.
with this much talent, it shouldn't be that difficult.
But I think.
I do like Odunze, and I like the fact that he is young. He can kind of sit behind Keenan Allen and DJ Moore, who are 2 incredible veteran wide receivers. He can learn from these guys while he's there, and he'll be the wide receiver 3 this year. And then who knows what happens? Injury prone bearing. Keenan Allen might end up kind of pushed out halfway through the season, and here comes Odunze. Love the spot for him. I think it sucks for fantasy for those that are playing this year, but gosh, if you're a Bears fan, you have both your QB1 and your wide receiver core is one of the best in the NFL.
Yeah, I think you'll see a lot. I think you'll see a lot of sets where all 3 on the field at the same time.
Yeah.
I think and I know the target share. There's only one football, but I think you're going to see Odunze on the field a lot with the other 2 because there's going to be a lot of attention on them. And I think Odunze has a nice, interesting little spot where he can average 5-6 receptions a game and maybe punch in some touchdowns. So I think there's some flex opportunities for him from a fantasy perspective, but it's even from a fan, like you'd rather have more weapons than less, and good for the Bears on getting more.
Well, that's what I was going to say too. Is you look at it, what a welcome to the NFL gift that the Bears gave to Caleb Williams. Like when you're trying to teach a quarterback, your starting rookie NFL quarterback, how to read a defense and how you want to scheme things and what to look for. When you have 3 guys who are as talented as these guys are, it makes running your offense a hell of a lot easier and teaching somebody because it gets that much harder when there's less separation between your wide receivers. When you're playing with a bunch of nobodies like Darnell Mooney and Byron Pringle, makes it a little bit harder for you to try and make those reads and say, is this guy going to get the separation that he needs? Can I trust him to be there when I need him there to make that contested catch, yada, yada, yada. And I think that when you have 3 guys who can get open pretty damn easily and then a Cole Kmet as well, you're really setting yourself up to ease him into the NFL with a shit ton of talent. So I love the Odunze landing spot for him too.
And, we're assuming that Odunze is going to be the 3rd wide receiver in this offense, but I don't think it's out of the question that Odunze ends up taking the role of DJ Moore or Keenan Allen, especially in 2 wide receiver sets.
Potentially.
Yeah, I don't think that's out of the question.
I don't either. I still hesitate just knowing the previous talent that those guys are, but you want to talk about people who fall off quick, let's talk about Allen Robinson. You know what I mean? Where's he at? And so, it is a possibility. Do I see it happening that quick? Probably not, but it could. And regardless, you like I said, the Bears have one of the best wide receiver groups in the NFL right now, in my opinion. That's it. We good to go, gentlemen? Anything else?
Let's do it.
That's all.
No? All right. Hey, want to say thank you to all you Brainiacs out there that have tuned into this show. And I do want to remind everybody else who is still listening, go check out Red Cross and donate to the Nebraska Relief Fund for the tornado damage that has ensued. It is a absolutely terrible thing. Us being a small little podcast from Omaha, Nebraska, breaks our hearts to see everything that's gone on with that, and thoughts and prayers with everybody that's affected. Appreciate it. Love you guys. It's been a blast. We'll do it again next week. We
are out.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you tune into our new releases every week on your favorite podcast app. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and check out leatherbrains.com for all of your fantasy football needs. And remember, Brainiacs, A championship should be more than a fantasy.